Supreme Court again. And I will guarantee you, when this thing works its way out, this latest issue, we are going to find this psycho bitch, Ginny Thomas's hands and fingerprints and teeth marks all over this new breach of Supreme Court secrecy. Now, kind of the background, not the background, but what's going on here, Democrats in Congress are demanding a further investigation at the Supreme Court. You know, there's one investigation going now, supposedly, as to who leaked the information about the Supreme Court's decision to tell women to go fuck themselves, that they did not have a right to control their own bodies. They did not have a right to make decisions about their own fertility. And they goddamn sure did not have a right to get an abortion. No privacy, no sovereignty, no abortion, nothing. Bitch, get back in the kitchen. Woo. But now lawmakers want a further investigation because of allegations that a landmark contraception decision by this shithole Christian slum called Hobby Lobby, that the decision of the Supreme Court that a company had the right to say to their employees, you cannot have insurance that offers contraception because it's against the Bible. You rotten bastards. But now it turns out that that decision on contraception was disclosed through a very secret influence campaign by these anti-abortion, anti-woman Christian terrorists. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is one of the two members of Congress who are demanding an investigation. The other one is Representative Hank Johnson of here in Georgia. Whitehouse said, quote, the first step to recovery is to admit you have a problem. At SCOTUS, we have a problem that runs deep. SCOTUS being the Supreme Court. Now, if you read the New York Times on Saturday, you saw this report. It was a huge investigative piece. It was published on Saturday by the New York Times, and it chronicled efforts for years by a Christian freak named the Reverend Robert Schenck, who was an evangelical minister and former anti-abortion leader. In other words, he was somebody who supported the idea of killing doctors who performed legal operations in this country. And he ran a nonprofit, and he accepted God knows how much money to his nonprofit to be used to reach these Christian terrorist justices on the Supreme Court and to reinforce their anti-abortion views. In other words, Mr. Schenck, Robert Schenck, decided, hey, all I need is money. These fuckers on the Supreme Court, these Christian terrorists are no different from me. You know, if I have enough money, I can buy them. He said that in 2014, and this just came out with interviews with the New York Times, he said that in 2014 he obtained advance word of the outcome. And the author of the decision, you're not going to be surprised who it was, the Supreme Court decision. In the case, it was entitled Burwell versus Hobby Lobby. It was a major case about contraception and the religious rights of corporations. Now, you heard me. The Christian crazy fuckers in this country now have declared that a stack of legal documents sitting in a filing cabinet or on a computer in an attorney's office, that filing has religious rights. I mean, this is how fucking crazy it's gotten. A corporate filing has religious rights that are more important than a right of a woman to privacy where it concerns whether or not she wants to use contraceptions. This is fucking insanity. I don't care how you look at it. But that's what the case was about. That decision, Hobby Lobby, and the one this spring about a woman's right to privacy, which overturned that right to privacy. Both those decisions were written by the Catholic fucking terrorist Sammy the Fish Alito. Both of them. And both were leaked. And both were leaked to these religious nutbucks who could then have advance notice to prepare their PR campaign on how to convince not just the Christian crazy people who said, yeah, that's a good idea, but the rest of us, that this was somehow a good rulings. No contraceptions for you, honey, and no privacy for you, honey. Jesus Christ. Sheldon Whitehouse said something that I have to take issue with. He said, quote, "We intend to get to the bottom of these serious allegations," end quote. Senator, you will never get to the bottom of these allegations. Never. That this information was leaked to Ginny Thomas or the rest of these right-wing fuckers like the Reverend Robert Schenck. Now, Schenck is admitting it. He's coming out and saying, oh, yeah, it happened. I was one of the people that worked this out. But that's as far as it's going to go. But what these revelations are revealing is the lack of accountability mechanisms on the Supreme Court. See, every federal judge in the country is bound by a written code of ethics, right? Except Supreme Court justices. And legislation is pending in Congress right now that would create a code of ethics for these Supreme Court justices. And that's another thing I am strongly suggesting nobody hold their breath on. That's not going to happen either. Senator Amy Klobuchar, the Minnesota Democrat, who is a member of the Judiciary Committee, just like Sheldon Whitehouse is. In response to the Times report on Saturday, Senator Klobuchar tweeted this, quote, "Where there are many potential solutions, here's one that the Supreme Court could adopt in 1 minute. Operate under the same ethics rules as every other federal judge." And that was all in caps. Well, this new revelation, it comes right in the middle of a so-called investigation by the Supreme Court's marshal into the extraordinary leak of that draft opinion in the one that denies women now the constitutional right to privacy, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, or whatever it was, the Dobbs decision, which overturned a woman's right to privacy and sovereignty over her own reproductive organs, and in that process, the right to an abortion. And the investigation that's going on right now about that is also trying to find out the role of this bitch monster, Ginny Thomas, the wife of the Black Avenger, Uncle Clarence Thomas. And they're also, in this investigation, trying to get to the bottom of the orange vomit, Donald Trump's efforts to reverse the 2020 election results by using the Supreme Court. Man, oh man. Now, the story here about this former evangelical minister who's now become a whistleblower, Schenck. A month after Chief Justice Roberts took the step of ordering this leak investigation, old Mr. Schenck sent him a letter saying that he, Schenck, believed that his information about the Hobby Lobby case was relevant to the Dobbs inquiry. They're tied together. Both decisions were written by this Nazi fucker Sam Alito, and both were leaked to the religious right. So Schenck said, hey, I may have some information here for you, Chief Justice. Schenck said to the New York Times that after he wrote that letter to John Roberts, he never got a response. Nothing. Now, wouldn't you think that the Chief Justice of the United States would take a look at this letter and say, maybe I should respond to this guy? Didn't happen. And when Sheldon Whitehouse wrote to Chief Justice Roberts about Schenck's organization, these Christian terrorists, the court sent a brief response to Sheldon Whitehouse that addressed nothing that Sheldon had written about. And then when the New York Times asked a spokeswoman for the court, another Christian demon named Patricia McCabe, when they asked her why the court had not responded to Mr. Schenck, she said no comment, which is a polite way of saying, go fuck yourself. Get out of here. What, are you kidding me? We are the apex of Christian demonology here at the Supreme Court. Get the fuck out of here. We don't have to answer your questions. The president, Donald Trump, who's the real president, he doesn't have to answer either. Now, a guy named Ed Whalen, who is the head of a Christian terrorist legal group, and Ed Whalen clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia, Fat Tony. He said on Twitter that while the private breach that Schenck is talking about, the evangelical Christian who has now become a whistleblower, he said that private breach, or that breach, was a different kind of scenario from what happened with the Dobbs decision. Ed Whalen said, quote, "It's long past time for Chief Justice to provide a report on what Dobbs leak investigation has uncovered," end quote. Again, let us all not hold our breaths, okay? Now, legal scholars say this. How do you regulate the Supreme Court? It's a riddle inside of enigma wrapped up in horseshit. Because independence is part of the design of the Supreme Court. It's a separate branch of government, not beholden to any fucking body. Nobody. And when you are appointed as a Supreme Court justice, unless you are impeached, and how many court justices have been impeached? 2, 3 in the history of this country? I don't even know. 1? But once you get that appointment, bro, you're there until you decide, oh, fuck, I better go because it's time for me to die. Or, oh, fuck, I better go and go be with my family or whatever. And even if both chambers of Congress agreed on legislation about the Supreme Court, it'd be meaningless. The legislative branch can't tell the Department of the judicial branch what to do, because by definition, the Supreme Court is the highest authority. So you can imagine what would happen. The United States Congress passes legislation that will begin to govern the Supreme Court, one way or the other, voluntarily, code of ethics, the law, whatever. And the first thing that happens, the Christian demons file a lawsuit to stop this. And the lower court says, well, no, we're not going to stop it. We're going to let it go. We think this is a good idea. So it goes to an appellate court. And the appellate court says, well, we have to abide by justice, by a code of ethics, so we're going to let it go. And then it goes to a federal district court or whatever the chain is. And all the way up the chain, every single court that hears this case that says the Supreme Court should have the same kind of restrictions on it as the rest of the federal court system, all the way up the line, the judges all say, yep, that's true, it should, until it gets to the Supreme Court. What do you suppose the Supreme Court is going to say when they get this case? They're going to say what the spokeswoman said the other day. Get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about? You want us to rule on the constitutionality of whether or not we should be bound by a code of ethics? Get out of town. That's what they'll say. Law professor at Fordham University, Bruce Green, he said in an interview about this shit, quote, "There's no oversight structure that creates rules for the justices and that enforces the rules. The fact," he went on, "that Roberts is the Chief Justice gives him certain administrative responsibilities, but he's not the boss of the other justices," end quote. So, what I'm trying to say to Hank, my representative down here, Hank Johnson, well, he's not mine, but he's his district is right next to where I live, but to Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, I just want to say to them, you ought to save your breath. Go ahead, make the effort. If you need to do that, make the effort. But it's not going to go anywhere. Legislation to put some restrictions on what has become the pinnacle of Christian terrorism in this country. And they have a lot more damage that they're going to do. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.